Welcome to Des Talks, a new podcast from Design Exhibition Scotland. I'm Susanna Beaumont, and I look forward to sharing with you over the coming months a series of insightful and inspiring conversations with some of our most adventurous and brilliant designers, artists, makers, curators and craftspeople. So welcome. Today I'm exploring and talking to the Hugo Burge Foundation, an ambitious new charity supporting the arts and crafts based in the Scottish border near the town of Duns. Launched last year, it celebrates the life of the late Hugo Burge, a dynamic and passionate entrepreneur and supporter of creativity. Over the last 10 years of his life, Hugo turned his home on the Marchmont estate into a buzzing haven for makers and creators. Orbiting a beautifully transformed steading and a glorious walled garden, the foundation is home to the chairmakers, the Marchmont Workshop, Marchmont Silversmithing Workshop, and numerous studio spaces and accommodation pods which are home to an ongoing and vibrant residency programme. Today I'm talking to Lucy Brown, CEO of the foundation, Scott Smith and Katie Watson, silversmithers, and to the head gardener, Toby Loveday. Hello and welcome, and I'm delighted to be talking to Lucy Brown, CEO of the Hugo Burge Foundation. Lucy is joining us via Zoom, and she's sitting in a very beautiful snug within the glass houses at Marchmont House in the Scottish borders. So welcome, Lucy. Thank you so much for joining us today. Can you tell us a little bit more about where you're sitting, and then we'll go on and talk about early years of the Hugo Burge Foundation?
Yeah, of course. It's lovely to speak to you. So I'm in a very unusual room, which is part of some early 20th century glass houses, Mackenzie and Moncur glass houses designed by Lorimer as part of his works to the estate in the early 20th century. And the sort of rooms at the back of the glass houses, which would have been potting sheds, tool stores, have been turned into spaces that we can use for meetings, classes, creative workshops, strategy days, all sorts of things. And I'm sitting in the snug today, which is the smallest room, and it has a lovely fire. The decoration theme of it when it was done was supposed to be medieval Japanese Gothic.
My, that's quite a meld stylistic.
You have to see it.
And I didn't realise it had been designed by Lorimer, who's obviously a celebrated architect of big houses. But I know he did wear the Marchmont Workshop, the cantilevered garage there. So I didn't know he did them. So that's wonderful.
Yeah, the glass houses were part of his additions to the built environment on the estate.
So perhaps you can just say, because what is so extraordinary about the Hugo Burge Foundation, that it's based in the Scottish borders, a hop and a skip from Duns. Can you just say about the landscape? Because it is just beautiful and curvaceous, but then the house and the buildings that you inhabit.
Yeah, it's a very hidden landscape. I grew up in Yorkshire in the Yorkshire Dales, and it's not like the Yorkshire Dales, and it's not like the Highlands of Scotland. It is a very particular landscape to the Scottish borders. And the reason I always describe it as hidden is because it's a bit like a roller coaster. There are hills, but they're small hills. So you find that you follow these kind of undulating paths through different parts of the countryside. It's not very inhabited, but there are these pockets where people live, but you can't see them unless you get really high up, but there's nowhere to kind of see all of them at the same time. So every time you find a new farmhouse or a new village, it's almost as if it's been hidden from you until you turn that little bend and come up to it. And we were talking about the lovely beech hedges. Mm-hmm. So Berwickshire, which is where we're based, Berwickshire is famous for its beech hedges and these huge sort of monumental, lovely hedges that line the sort of narrow roads, which make the visibility even harder when you're navigating your way around. But they're so beautiful. They are luminous green just now in early May. They'll turn that lovely deep green and then russet for the autumn. And they're never bare. There's always something on them. They're fascinating. And And when they do the writing of the boundaries and the borders, one of the famous things that you have to do if you ride the Berwickshire boundary is you have to take a twig of beech and put it in your lapel to show that you've crossed that boundary in Berwickshire. Yeah, they're very special, very much a part of the history and the heritage of the area. There's a lot of hugely mature, beautiful beech trees, copper beeches. And yeah, the borders has... Yeah, it's hidden. I think that's the best way to describe it. You find these hidden enclaves, which are just charming and interesting. It's very agricultural, but there are these pockets of creativity. It's a place where I think artists are quite drawn to, but yeah, in their different little tiny villages.
And the foundation inhabits the steading, the glass houses. There's the old kennels, which has been converted into the Marchmont Workshop for silversmithing, which we will be speaking to later in this podcast. Can you just then say how the foundation landed in this pocket, because it's such a creative pocket, and when you arrive, you often do hear the sound of somebody making, somebody crafting, somebody hammering, somebody polishing. So how did the foundation come to be there? Maybe talk a little bit about Hugo Burge.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, that's why it's here, because of Hugo Burge. So Hugo and his father bought the estate and eventually bought the house. There's a Palladian mansion that sits on the estate, which is separate to the foundation. But they bought the house and the estate, and they were restoring it, really. They tried to piece bits of the estate back together. They did an enormously ambitious and beautiful restoration of the house itself. And then Hugo kind of turned his particular personal attention to the other parts of the estate, and in particular the outbuildings where the stables, the steadings and the garage used to be. And also, as you mentioned, to the walled garden and the glass houses. So he took on those as his personal project, sort of separate from the main running of the estate. And his dream with that was really to have a space to encourage creativity and to give artists and craftspeople a community and a home, as well as temporary and visiting artists, just to have a community where it was very much based for him on that dreamlike, idealistic arts and crafts village, if you like, where people would trade skills, trade knowledge, and live very closely with nature. That was his vision at the time. And the buildings were all derelict. They were absolutely just collapsed, fallen down, pigeons everywhere. They were awful. And they are now absolutely stunning. And he had an incredible love of design and an eye for detail. And that is what you see when you go in those buildings. And I think mostly when someone does that, it's with an eye to commercial gain. So they restore a building, they make it into something that's so beautiful and so inspiring that people will want to come to it, and it'll make money. And that was not the aim. It was very much about creating this community. So for us now, those buildings are a nurturing space for a lot of visiting artists and craftspeople. Plus we have some permanent tenants of it. And the same with the glass houses in the garden. It was a wreck. The walled garden was a production garden for the house before the First and Second World Wars. And then after both those wars, it fell into disuse. They couldn't employ the staff. And it became just an overgrown sort of field, if you like, with brambles. The glass houses were completely taken over in that wonderful way that glass houses get, with trees growing through them. And I think there wasn't a single pane of glass intact, but it was made from teak, so the wood was intact. So when that restoration happened, which took about 3 years, and as I said, this was Hugo's personal project, the actual wooden structure was there, which was really important. And we now have a team. We employ 4 gardeners who look after that, plus the site generally. And they're creating what I think and I hope will be one of the most beautiful arts and crafts based walled gardens that you'll see anywhere, which is lovely, and what Hugo would have just loved.
Wonderful, wonderful. Maybe tell me a little bit more about the residence and how you offer residencies to maybe an artist or writer or a maker. And then, as you say, you've got permanent, got the Marchmont Workshop there. You've got Richard Goldsworthy. So this wonderful mix of people that are just kind of passing through for a kind of restorative nourishment and creative kind of reboot, maybe. And then you've got the old timers. And so, which maybe they don't like, but I think that's what works so wonderfully. People that can show hospitality to somebody that may be there just for a fortnight or a month. How does that work? Because it seems to work brilliantly, this mix.
Yeah, it does. And as you say, everyone's always busy. So what our temporary residents tell us is that they can focus really well because there's a lot of activity going on around them. So they're maybe in a studio in a rural estate, miles from anywhere, and they're in this space. And often with residencies, that is where you are. You do go out of the normal day to day and you are somewhere quite remote. But the difference here is that you can hear activity around you, and all of that activity is somebody making something, building something, working on something artistically or creatively. So there's that sense of, I'm going to get on with it too. You know, I'm going to really kind of knuckle down here and get working on whatever part of their practice they're there to work on. But we offer two different ways, if you like, to engage temporarily with the studios, different lengths. And then we have two permanent businesses, if you like. So we've got the Marchmont Workshop, who make the rush seat chairs and other projects in wood, so tables, chairs, things like that. And then you've got the Red Braes Pottery, which is, again, a business that was supported by the foundation to start up. They were given the space, some funding to start, and then it becomes its own sustainable business. So that's Red Braes Pottery.
And that's in the village of Greenlaw, just a few miles.
Yeah. It's just a couple of miles out. So, and they're doing great work with classes, with community open sessions, and kind of spreading that creativity from the estate into the community, which is important. And then we have our springboard studios. So we have 3 studios which are given completely free of charge, fully funded by the foundation for a year. And they are offered to artists who want to, they're at a junction with their career, hopefully, where they would just benefit from being able to give a solid amount of time without distraction, without having to work full time on other projects, just to their work. And so we give them a studio and they join the community for a year or 2 years. They can apply to extend it for 2 years if they're building something here that they want to keep.
And that's open to writers, makers, artists. So it's a warm and wide embrace to any discipline.
Yeah, absolutely. Very much so. The way it's turned out with our current springboard studio holders, we've got an illustrator, a weaver and a hand engraver coming. But we had applications from a hugely diverse group, excuse me, of people, from choreographers to visual artists to writers. Yeah.
And is that from across the UK or international?
It is, yeah. So all our opportunities are open across the UK for the studios, and we have accommodation on site and nearby that we can offer. So people pay to sort of rent a space, an affordable rent, and then they get everything else is provided for them, fully funded by us, which is just life-changing, hopefully, for quite a few makers. It just gives them the opportunity to, you know, really push themselves and see if they can make a go of it, you know, and see if they can make everything work. And the other aspect where we offer the space is through our temporary residencies. So we do 22 residencies every year now.
That's quite a number.
Yeah. When I started in sort of late 2021, we did 5. So we've really upped that, mainly because it's so valuable to artists. And I'm using artists in the broadest possible sense. As you picked up on, it is very much open to any discipline. So we have 22 of those. Those residents come to us for 4 weeks. They are given accommodation, a studio, a living stipend for those 4 weeks. And they get to join in as much or as little as they want with the established community here, with the chair makers, with the pottery, with the silversmiths. And then at the end of that time, they either share what they've been doing if they wish to, but we leave it deliberately open because we want it to be time, the gift of time, the gift of being supported and just held for 4 weeks without having to worry about anything else.
But also you've got this wonderful common room within the steading, and often I've been there, and there's a smell of good food as well as the sound of crafting and making. So that's what's so wonderful. You can encounter and have conversations. Either you're walking in the woods, or you're catching a snack, or you're cooking. So that kind of wonderful sense that, yes, you can encounter other ideas and other disciplines and individuals who may be at various stages of their career. I think that's it. You can rub against maybe, as you say, a chair maker or silversmith in a way that you haven't previously. Is that a kind of conscious to be this kind of universal celebration and support of creativity?
Yeah, very much. There is obviously a lot of casual bumpings into and meetings that we don't control as a foundation. They just happen. But we do also put in specific opportunities. So we host an artist's lunch every month in the common room, where it's fully catered. We get everyone around the table, because often when you're working away, it's quite hard to lift your head up sometimes and think, oh, I must go and see someone. So just that one spot a month is guaranteed that you'll meet everybody. And if you're a resident for 4 weeks, that's your chance to meet everyone else who's on site properly and have a chat with them socially. And then we also have, so our creative director, James Fox, does a lot of mentoring with our residents, both the permanent ones, the Springboard studios, and the temporary residents. He will often, depending on what they need, take on that sort of mentoring role for whatever they're working on. And as part of that, he assures me it's very important that they all go to the pub. They go to the pub. So there tends to be...
But which pub? I'm keen to know which pub do they...
We used to go to the Allenton Inn, which is a lovely pub not too far away. But now they've just renovated the Black Bull pub in Duns, which is now a lovely place to go and much closer. So we tend to go there now. And James takes whoever's around, plus the temporary residents, to the pub a couple of times a month. And again, it's just that sense of you find out so much about what has motivated someone to be in their practice or where they've come from, as well as what they're working on just now. And many of the residents form friendships professionally or just actual close friendships from being here together, because we always have 2 residencies running concurrently at the same time, so that when you're here, you're not completely alone. There's someone else who's new and who doesn't know where they are yet. And you've got kind of a buddy, if you like, in a totally different discipline, but they're there. That's
what I find. I think, having spoken to lots of artists and makers and designers over the years, I think sometimes residencies can be a challenge. It's maybe all that you've wanted. You're so delighted you've been accepted, you've found time, you've carved a space out of a kind of busy, your everyday life to go away. And sometimes it feels like a parallel world. And then you're confronted with yourself and what you do, whether it's an artist or a choreographer. And I think sometimes you can butt up against kind of questions, big question marks about how you're doing it, what you're doing. And I think, again, it can be quite a lonely, or yes, you're just confronted by your being. So I think that's brilliant that there's that mentoring and pints and bags of crisps, because I think it is. And as you say, that those dialogues, whether it's informal or formal, because I think it is that nourishing, isn't it? And then, as you say, the legacy is maybe friendships and an exchange of information. Hello, here we are at Marchmont Silversmithing Workshop. I'm sitting here with Katie Watson and Scott Smith, 2 of the silversmithers who are currently working here. It's a beautiful sunny day. There's a hint of birdsong outside, and we're sitting in the studios here, which were once kennels as part of Marchmont Estate, and they were opened in 2023. So hello.
Hello.
Dr. Katie, I just want you to talk a little bit firstly about the early days of the workshop. Can you just kind of tell me a little bit more, and particularly about Graham Stewart, who was a silversmither who was based in Dunblane, who died back in 2020, but very much wanted all his workbenches and tools to be given for the good and use of future silversmithers.
Yes, so Graham Stewart was a famous Scottish silversmith based in Dunblane, and he knew he was ill and he knew he was dying, and he wanted to set up something or be a part of something that would encourage the next generation of silversmiths, and focusing in Scotland as well and continuing the longevity of traditional Scottish silversmithing. So Graham got in touch with the Incorporation of Goldsmiths, which is based in Edinburgh, which is like our governing body, if you will. And they introduced Graham to Hugo Burge up at the Marchmont House. So Graham actually invited Hugo to his workshop in Dunblane, showed him around, showed him the setup and all the tools and what could be in this disused kennels on the Marchmont estate. And yeah, from there, steamrolled, and the place was renovated and a new roof was put on the workshop, and it's all avalanche from there. Yeah.
And how did you both come to be here? How did that? So the workshop opened, I think that was in 2023, and it's beautiful. I mean, you've got you've got 5 benches here. You've got the tools. You've got various different rooms and spaces. So how were you drawn here?
So yeah, we were both based in Scotland beforehand anyway, and we both knew we wanted to kind of stay in Scotland. And I think as soon as this kind of open call came out, I think we both kind of jumped at the opportunity.
Absolutely.
Because there really is no workshop for just silversmiths. You get a lot of jewellery workshops, or a lot of jewellers, and then maybe one silversmith among them, but there's no place just for silversmiths.
Both studied at Glasgow School of Art.
Yeah.
And were you aware as you graduated that's what you wanted to do, was to kind of specialise in silversmithing? So in a way, this is very timely. You could find a place that you could go and land.
Absolutely, yeah. It definitely came at the right time for our careers, I believe. You know, we were experimenting and trialing different techniques while at university, and then post-graduation we both had different placements that allowed us to develop our practice and kind of explore new processes, but we really needed somewhere to hone our craft and develop that and launch a successful business in Scotland, you know, not just a residency or a space, but somewhere that encouraged, you know, business skills and mentorship and focus on craft in Scotland, I think was the key to that. So the timing was perfect for us.
And so when did you both arrive here?
So we actually moved here in January of 2023, and the place wasn't finished yet. They were still rendering the building.
January a bit nippy?
It was. Yeah. There wasn't the bird song that you hear just now. January.
So yeah, we had a kind of like a makeshift workshop in one of the sheds over there. But it was nice because then we were on site to kind of help, you know, bring all the tools in and build the workshop up and create it as how you see it now, which was really nice being a part of that.
That was quite a big move because you were both at Glasgow and it's beautiful. And as we say, the sun is shining and the birds are singing. But January, and also Marchmont is your nearest corner shop is Greenlaw, so kind of a few miles away.
Yeah, you need to drive around here.
How do you find that shift to a very different... But there are other makers here. There's other workshops and artists and designers. How did you find that working as a community?
So beforehand, I went to a place called Bishopsland Educational Trust, which is kind of a similar setup to here. And it takes on about 10 silversmiths and jewellers, and it's in a rural location down in Oxfordshire. So I was there for 2 years, and it was a very similar setup. So I was kind of used to being in the remote kind of outdoors and everything. So
in England.
In England. So it was really nice having this, but in Scotland and near my family and friends and everything. So and I grew up in North Berwick, also kind of a countryside town, seaside town. I like being out in the countryside.
But you both, not only do you have a workshop here, you have accommodation, you have a home here, so that you're a hop and a skip literally from your bench to. And how has that worked, and how has that affected the way that you can work and that you've developed and, as you say, honed your skills and crafts? How has that been that you've both been here for a couple of years now? Can you maybe say, firstly, Scott, how your work has changed and progressed and been nourished and nurtured by the time here?
Yeah, so I actually am from a rural background in the northeast of Scotland, and I almost ran away to Glasgow to escape the rural life. And I lived in Glasgow for 7 years and I really enjoyed it and I loved it. And then to move here was a big culture shock. But in Glasgow, there was obviously the distraction of the city and my friends, you know, the nightlife and everything that comes with city living. So coming here and actually living here, you know, after 4 o'clock, you know, people hurry back to their boroughs and it's just us that's left here. So you kind of are left with, what shall I do this evening? I guess I'll work, you know, and then sometimes it's Saturday comes along. What will I do today? I guess I'll work, you know, and you have your tea, you go in, sit inside. So nothing on the TV. I guess I'll go back and work. So it really has given us a focused, almost intense time to work on our practice and fully immerse yourself in our practice with no outside distractions. So it would be easy to sit inside with a book or go on walks for hours. But because the workshop is here, you want to work and we want to develop, and it makes you feel a part of something being here as well, especially immersed with all the other artists. And then the legacy of Graham and Hugo, you want to make something, you know, you want to be out here using the space, developing and pushing the craft forward and, you know, looking to the future of Scottish silversmithing as well.
And how do you think your work has evolved? Do you both feel that you can be experimental, that there's a space for innovation and testing and trying new ideas?
Yeah, definitely. I think because Graham had so many different tools as well, and, you know, it is tricky starting our own workshop and building our own collection of tools. So experimenting with tools we might not necessarily have bought ourselves is quite interesting. And, you know, the big fly press, which kind of stamps out kind of different forms and engraving tools. So it's interesting exploring, experimenting with the different tools that we might not necessarily have used otherwise. And for me, I think because this workshop is so big and, you know, you've got all the hammers and all the different stakes, it's kind of led me into more sculptural forms, which is quite an interesting new kind of approach to my work.
I think that a large part of our craft, or that hinders us in our craft, is the cost. The cost of the material is just so sky high that if we have all these grand ideas, you know, to make a large centerpiece for the table, but the material cost itself is thousands of pounds for that. But when you come here, you don't need to worry about investing in the tools or the hammers or the gas or the rent, or, you know, we're allowed to just focus on the material and let that be the constraint rather than all the other circumstances. So it's almost like we have permission to invest in the materials ourselves, and because we have access to these tools that we wouldn't have had before.
And I suppose that allows a sense of adventure because you're not having to be so concerned about overheads.
Yes.
So maybe, Scott, do you want to just talk a little bit about your work as a silversmith? What first drew you to the material of silver?
That's an interesting question. Well, as I say, I'm from the northeast of Scotland and I come from a farming background, and I'm really immersed in that raw, rugged landscape of the cliffs and then coastline of Banffshire and then the agricultural, rural life that I'm from. And I was always inspired by the hard working of the land and the people that come before. So I'm really drawn to like my Pictish ancestors, and this Celtic influence comes through my work. And I like to think that these tools and these materials that we're using are centuries old. The only thing that is different is the time and the context. So I like to build upon that legacy of Pictish art in the Northeast, and looking at stone carving, looking at repetitive traditional skills, whether that be farming or stone carving or knitting, and translating that into silver and using, you know, silver as a way of storytelling. As silversmithing is very repetitive and it's rhythmic and it's meditative, and you tap, tap, tap and you bang, bang, bang. And I think that helps me connect to my Pictish ancestors and tradition.
Because there's something about the coordination of hand, eyes, and working in partnership with your material, which you say has been happening for centuries and centuries, and that skill, that patience, that learning. So that clearly is something that you pull upon, but also echoing deep into the kind of landscape of your past and your ancestors.
I like to think I'm acknowledging that story and responding to it whilst immersing myself in the making. And you do fully immerse yourself. Once you start, you don't want to stop. You know, you really connect with the material and the making process. the hammering, the feel of the metal, the sound of steel on silver. You know, you really get caught in it and you just want to keep going. Yeah.
Luckily.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Katie, what was your kind of coming to silver? Because it is a particular, obviously, material, and obviously makers can work uniquely with gold. But even if you work with wood, you might have oak to ash to sycamore. So how was your first encounter to silver?
I think it was about the technique for me. So I use a specific technique called chasing and repoussé, whereby I'm kind of hammering steel punches into the silver, kind of almost using silver as a canvas to draw upon. And I came from kind of a painterly background, so I did a lot of drawings and illustrations, and that led quite nicely into the metal smithing and combining the kind of drawing illustration with the metal. And all of my inspiration comes from what's around me, nature, walks I've been on. So I collect different kind of drawings and imagery and make a kind of miniature illustration within silver, or I'm currently experimenting with copper, because you can create all these kind of gorgeous colours, as well as experiment with more scale, because it is a less expensive material to work with, which is quite nice. But yeah, silver is a lovely material to work with, especially with chasing, because it's soft and strong at the same time. So you can hammer, quite deep forms into it, but it keeps that kind of strength as well, which is really nice.
And what about, to us, even though we've got this kind of splendid isolation here, about selling work? I mean, you're both going to go on and continue silversmithing once you leave the workshop here at Marchmont. How do you feel this is adding and supporting the whole ecology within Scotland? Because here at this workshop, you also have residency. You have 5 benches, and there's benches for other. Can you maybe just say about who else comes here and uses these brilliant workshop?
Yeah, I think a strength in our industry specifically is the community of silversmiths, and we're part of an organisation called the Contemporary British Silversmiths, but then the association with the Incorporation of Goldsmiths in Edinburgh as well, to keep that Scottish legacy going. We have the masters of our industry, you would say, who are at the top of the game and rode the wave of the 70s and 80s of people wanting silver, essentially, and they made a living out of it. And now that they have made it, they're passing on their skills to the next generation. And because it's so specific, silversmithing, the skills that we're learning are so unique that it's not just an evening class you can learn. It is something you have to fully immerse yourself in and absorb. That this next generation coming through do lack a bit of the skill of this previous generation. So it's definitely through Marchmont here, people want to be involved and they want to help us and they want to see this workshop succeed and the residents of that workshop succeed. So we had Rod Kelly, who's based in Shetland, a silversmith, come down and teach us his chasing techniques. Then we also had Brett Payne from Sheffield come up to teach us his business skills and mentoring. So it's about keeping the skills alive, as well as then the business side of things, the longevity of our craft as well. And
then inviting maybe recent graduates to come in here to do a residency, or it could be a mid-career silversmith. Yeah. So this is really kind of building and melding ideas together.
Absolutely, and the sharing of ideas as well. Again, the generosity of the community, but this openness to want silversmithing in Scotland to continue, that we're all a part of. We really want to see that last. And I think that the openness, that we're not, hiding what we're doing in this workshop, but we're rather saying, come and look at what we're doing. And looking for help rather than doing it in isolation.
And I understand, Scott, that you soon to be moving back to Aberdeen. So what's the next chapter for you?
Yeah, so I ran away from home, but now I feel drawn to home. I miss the sea and I miss the North Sea, and I really see my craft developing in Aberdeenshire, connecting with whiskey, and my dad grows barley, which is a nice connection. And then I make silver whiskey tumblers, so I think there's a really nice connection here between the handcrafted bespoke silver, as well as then the heritage of whiskey in the northeast of Scotland. So I'm looking to build a network up there and push my craft forward into the whiskey of Aberdeenshire.
And Katie, for you,
So I'm in talks with Hugo Burge Foundation at the moment to potentially stay on as their kind of senior silversmith. So they'll still have 3 new emerging makers come in and use the benches, but I might just move my bench up to a different kind of room, and that will kind of allow me to carry on in this beautiful workshop. And I'm close to my family, you know, it's an hour's drive away from here, next to my inspirations and so on. So yeah, I would love to stay on. So yeah, we'll see what happens with that.
I think that also encourages that like community aspect and the sharing of ideas and wanting to help the next, as if, you know, Katie staying and helping the next, and then people coming and visiting Katie, you know, customers even who know Katie's work coming back to the workshop. It just all helps silversmithing in Scotland.
But finally, I've always loved the words that you use for the various processes with silver. What's your favourite word, and what's your favourite process?
That's an interesting...
I mean, I guess mine is chasing and repoussé, just because that's the technique I use.
And what is that exactly?
So chasing is you're putting the kind of lines on the metal on one side, and then repoussé is turning the sheet over and pushing it out and make it 3-dimensional, and you'll turn it back over and then add all the details. So it's, 2 different processes, but you use them in conjunction.
And I think I quite like the differing hammering techniques that we use and the different hammers we use. So instead of just having one engineer's hammer, you know, we have a planishing hammer, a raising hammer, a corking hammer, a bouge hammer. You know, we have a plethora of hammers in the workshop, and then using different techniques on the silver with just a slightly different face on the hammer.
And it sounds like the sound, because you talked about tapping, so I'm sure every hammer makes a slightly different...
It does, absolutely. Yeah. And we can hear that. We know immediately once we start if that's the right hammer or the wrong hammer.
Simply by listening.
Simply by the sound.
And can you tell what hammer she's using?
Absolutely.
Just by the sound.
You can, the birds know when Katie's chasing here as well. You know, you can definitely hear it, and again, it does become quite meditative, and because of that rhythmic tapping, and once you get into the zone, and it does become like almost our response to the bird song of our tapping and tap, 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 tap. The woodpecker outside and us in here.
So woodpecker and silver pecking.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Katie and Scott.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm now delighted to be chatting to Toby Loveday, who's the head gardener at the Hugo Burge Foundation. Toby has been flat out restoring the gardens at Marchmont. And of course, it's spring and everything is bubbling and bursting and growing. So, Toby, thanks so much for your time. So just say a little bit, because we're talking about a walled garden, which are particularly beautiful. And that sense of an enclosure and that warmth and those wonderful smells of things growing that you find particularly in a walled garden. So kind of paint a picture of the gardens.
So our walled gardens are much like many of the others throughout the country, in that quite a lot of traditional walled gardens would actually only be walled on 3 sides. And the purpose behind that was to allow the frost to move down the hill and out of the garden. So, and the wall garden has been in existence here since probably around about the same time as the main house was built, so the 1750s into the 1760s, and has evolved many times over those years. And, you know, its original function would be to produce food for the family and for the estate. And then as that became less of a need, it became more of an environment for ornamental plants and for people to spend their leisure time. And unfortunately, over the years, ours, like a lot of others, were simplified to ease the maintenance. And when we look back in the more recent history, so anything from kind of about the mid-1980s probably onwards, you were looking at a very simple space with, you know, very little in terms of ornamental planting, a lot of grass, some hedges, and the glass houses, which were sort of heading into some serious decay.
And what sort of size is this wall garden? It's about half an acre,
It's, about an acre, yeah. So not enormous. There's wall gardens that are a lot bigger. It's a good size. And obviously facing south towards the Cheviot Hills. obviously the main function behind the wall garden is to protect from the outside. So often people make the mistake that think it's just to protect it from things like deer, but they were also to protect it from people, to stop people from getting in and stealing all of their vegetables. So it had that sort of function.
But what also I'm sure I read somewhere that wall gardens, and again often enclosed by brick walls and often very beautiful rich red brick colouring, is that they face south, but often on a gradient. So the kind of heat would rise and it would kind of create this kind of its own little kind of microclimate within that, because and is that the case at Marchmont?
Yeah. And generally what you will find is that they'll be built with two layers. So the inside layer is usually built of brick, and that helps to reflect the heat back into the garden. And the outside is generally made of stone. And in some cases where there was a lot of money available, it would be nice dressed stone, but quite often it would literally just be put together from rubble. And quite often rubble and bits and pieces that was left over from building the main houses. So just basically to keep the cost down. And then in a lot of cases, they had a void between the two layers. So the outer layer and the inner layer, you would have a void. And sometimes it actually have the capability of being able to put fireplaces in and actually heat that cavity.
Wow.
To, especially in the springtime, to protect blossoms from any late frosts, which, is a wonder of engineering. It's the extremes that people would go to produce
an
food.
Apricot or a fig. Yeah. But I mean, this is it, what you get about when you get these large houses and then their gardens and that desire and ability, because there was the wealth and the expertise and the skills to grow figs or to grow or a pineapple or whatever. But you've got these fabulous, do you call them hot houses or glass houses, or what's your
traditionally they would have been known as hot houses. I think glass houses tends to be the sort of more professional horticultural term for them. But yeah, we're very lucky to have the glass houses as part of the wall garden. And they would date back to around about 1915, 1916, something like that. But there were actually, we believe, glass houses in the wall garden prior to that. There's an 1858 Ordnance Survey map that shows a building that corresponds with the remnants of what we've still got in the garden, which shows where the wooden struts would have met the main wall of the walled garden. So we believe that would have been the original glass houses before the current ones were built. So yeah, we've been very lucky to have them.
And were they designed by Robert Lorimer, who did a lot of work kind of reconfiguring the big house? Do we know? I mean, the celebrated Scottish architect.
It certainly coincides with his development of the house. Whether Lorimer had anything to do with the glass houses, I don't know, because Mackenzie and Moncur that built the glass houses would have had quite a strong design office. They would, by the time we get to 1915, they'd been building glass houses for quite some time. So the examples that we have are ones that are quite far on in terms of the evolution and in terms of the design process and the materials that they were using. So it's more than likely, I'm just guessing really, but it's more than likely that their own design would have been part of the build, and whether Laura was involved in it, I'm not sure.
But I've always had an interest in Mackenzie Moncur because they were based in Edinburgh. They did work throughout Scotland, UK, sometimes the world, in working with structures like hot houses, but also drains. And and you can still see on many a road Mackenzie Moncur drains. And I've always had an interest in them because I've always liked a hot house. So the transformation or the restoration of these hot houses, glass houses, it's to grow plants, but it's also for artists, makers to sit and you do classes. Tell us how that transformation has come about and how this celebrates Hugo's vision and what the hope is that the gardens and the glass houses will offer.
Yeah. Well, the glass houses originally, like the wall garden, would have been created to produce food. And as there was less of a need for that over time, they were developed more for ornamental plants. So Hugo's vision for the restoration, he basically gave them a new purpose. He said right from the beginning, what would be the point in replacing all the glass and doing all the work to the structure to just produce huge quantities of food that actually, it's nice, but is there any real need for it? And I think his vision was to create just a really nice, beautiful space, particularly for him in mind to relax and switch off. He still very much loved the idea of being able to pick fruit. So that was a big part of the plan for the planting, was to try and incorporate that as much as possible. So anything that we grew was the sort of thing that you'd literally be able to sort of pick off without too much fuss, like as you were passing.
Is it soft fruits? Is it the peach, the apricot, the fig?
Yeah, all the sort of traditional things: figs, peaches, passion fruit, kiwi fruits, lemons, grapes.
Wow.
We actually have grown a small, it's the Japanese kiwi fruit that doesn't tend to have such a hairy exterior to it, and they're grown primarily to be able to eat just straight off the vine sort of thing. So yeah, so fruit's a big part of it, and we do still use it for growing things like tomatoes and cucumbers and melons and all of that kind of stuff. But as well, we've tried to create this tranquil space with various themes. So each house has got a slightly different theme to it. And originally the plan was to be able to produce pot plants to go up to the house, but we really have now created a big collection which keeps the glass house looking good from March, April, all the way through into the early autumn. So
you've got all these spaces. So an artist or a maker that's either there more permanently within the steading and the studios, or residents who are just there to spend 6 weeks working on a new piece of choreography or a book, can come and spend time just kind of whiffing. Are they allowed to pick the fruit?
Yeah, I mean, I think Hugo always wanted his garden to be very welcoming and homely. So we're hoping to try and keep that all going. Artists will quite often, come and just sit and just take it all in. We actually had one artist who came round. I think they had their mother visiting at the time, and their mum was quoted as saying that walking through the glasshouse felt like having a massage. And I think that's like a really nice way to put it. And I suppose, like the rest of the garden, as part of the aims of the foundation, we're trying to create a space that has that tranquility and hopefully that sense of inspiration and relaxation to be able to help people get into that zone and help them sort of feed their creative juices, basically. So, yeah.
Oh, and what's your favourite? If you had to pluck a fruit from one of those trees, what would it be?
The passion fruit. I was really, really happy with the passion fruit last year. Quite often they're just they can be a bit sharp, but these were just absolutely perfect. And what we did was we actually allowed them to ripen so much that they fell off the vine, and that was the sort of the perfect time. So that's what I'm going to try and do this year, is not be too hasty in picking them and just allow them to drop off when they're ready.
And do you make jam? I'm a bit of a jam maker. I just
tried to when we had. And if you think, so we're only really in year 3. We're really just in the beginnings of. We had a crop of peaches last year that was really good, but some of them are just going to take a few years to find their feet, I think. But eventually, I think we're going to have quite a lot.
Okay, the Hugo Burge preserves. We look forward to that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Toby, for sharing the delights of the wall garden at Marchmont. And you have open days, don't you? So if anybody wants to find out more, or classes, do you do classes in?
We do, yeah, we do. Particularly at the moment, we've got a series of cut flower workshops that we do. We're hoping to do a lot more in the future, particularly anything practical to show people how we look after the gardens and how they can look after their own. But yeah, we have our open days in June and in September. And we're also open this year for the first time since, I think it was 1981, the last time it was open on Scotland's Garden Scheme. So we'll be open every Friday afternoon in July and August this year.
Brilliant. And let me tell visitors, because I also eyed up the vastness and the beauty and the well organisation of your compost heaps.
Yeah, I would love to eventually do some composting workshops. I know it's something that people are very passionate about, and everybody's got a slightly different take on what's needed to produce good compost, and everybody's got different needs and produce different things to compost. So yeah, I'm particularly keen on what we're doing, and we're looking to be able to use it more and more so that we don't buy in compost anymore for things like the potting of the plants in the glass house. So that's the direction that we're hopefully going to move in over the next year or two.
Oh, I look forward to a composting workshop. But thank you so much, Toby, and may the sun shine, but may it also rain, because I know that's what we're looking.
Nice.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
So what plans? I mean, you clearly the Hugo Burge Foundation is burgeoning, and as you say, from the residencies from half a dozen a few years ago to 22 now. How are you further kind of stretching and thinking and aspiring?
Well, we're hugely ambitious, and we always were. So when I came on to work on this project back in late 2021, early 2022, it was an empty box. Hugo had set up a foundation. He didn't really know what it was going to do yet. And even when I took the role, I remember agreeing to take the role and then saying, I'm not entirely sure what it is I'm going to be doing. And he said, no, well, we're just going to figure it out as we go along. But he was a hugely ambitious person. The extent of the amount of projects he could be running simultaneously was massive. And I loved that. And I have carried that forward, probably to my detriment, if you ask my family or my friends. But we are hugely ambitious, and we have a team now. So until September last year, I was the sole employee of the foundation and had always been. And now we have a really brilliant team. So we have James Fox, our creative director, who's part-time with us, obviously, because he's still teaching and doing broadcasting, but just a great person to have on board to really push us forward as well. And then we have a site supervisor now, my colleague Nick, who really looks after what you're talking about there with the loneliness sometimes of residencies. We learned that the hard way. In the early days, we had people struggle that's very remote, and having even someone who's just there every day, who you can ask questions of, who'll help you out, who'll help you light the fire. We have artists coming who've never lit a stove. It's things like that makes a big difference. And we also have the fantastic Emma, who does all of our residencies panels. We receive hundreds of applications every month for residencies, and from this month for grant funding. So she sorts all of that out in the most fantastic way. So that's changed a lot. But I always say to people, with Hugo and I had a 5-year plan and we had a 10-year plan. And since his death and the subsequent bequest, if you like, of his personal wealth to the foundation, I now have a 200-year plan. It's a 200-year business plan for me. It's this foundation needs to be here in 200 years, supporting artists, supporting creativity. But in more prosaic kind of on the ground terms, we've got a new building. We're branching out from
where? I mean, I love this idea of 200 years. You sound like a beech tree. I keep on thinking of trees. 200 years. Now you're branching out. Where are you branching out to?
Branching out into a local community, Earlston, which is about half an hour from our site in Marchmont. And this is something that Hugo and I did just before he died, which is he was desperate to get premises for the foundation that were separate from the estate so that they could belong to a community. And we found a building, and we didn't even have time to get a lawyer, I don't think. I remember writing an offer and trying to persuade the council to sell us this old building. And they did, which was fantastic. So this summer we are converting that very ugly old building that looks like a barracks into creative spaces hub. So there'll be 10 studios to rent, either as artist studios, or we've had a lot of interest from charities who often don't have their own space, who need a space to rent, to run their own classes, or just to have an address to apply for funding from. But also that building will have fully fitted out and professionally run print studio, which is super exciting. And we're working with a fantastic print artist and facilitator, Georgie Fay, who's going to run that studio for us. And that will be for anyone in the community, artists who don't want to go into the city. We've got Earlston itself has a big high school, it has a primary school. There's a lot of community groups there, very active. They've been so welcoming. So that print studio facility will be open to everyone.
And when?
Hopefully October.
Soon.
And then we've added also a little media suite to the plans for Earlston. So things like podcasts can happen, both for young people and anyone in the community will be able to use that space. So it's really exciting because it's actually a place you can get a bus to, and it's a place where maybe you walk past it on your way to school. And to me, that's so much more powerful for a community. You don't have to come to engage with it. It's there. It's in the middle of everything else you're doing. So I'm really hopeful that adds something a bit different.
And as you say, I mean, Marchmont and where the foundation is a little hidden pocket behind these wonderful, voluptuous beech hedges. And Earlston is a kind of small town, as you say, with a high school and primary school. And so that's brilliant. I'm curious to know what building it used to be. What did it used to be?
It was a council offices. Actually, it was the Adult Learning Disability Service, which is really quite useful because we're going to have a teaching space in there. And one of the groups we would love to work with is learning disabled adults who often don't have spaces to access art studios and things like that. So it's quite nice in the way I've spoken to the team who used to be in the building, and they're really keen to come and engage with it for their members and their service users once we're up and running. Oh, brilliant. Well, Lucy, that was all new news to me. And I think that's brilliant, the idea of a print studio in Earlston. And as I say, it sounds more like people can just drop in, and that informality, whether it's a school child or resident. So all good luck with that. But thank you so much for, on this sunny day, going into the snug, which looks so, and you are sitting on a Marchmont Workshop ladder back chair, which looks beautiful. But thank you so much. And in the information on the podcast, links to the Hugo Burge Foundation and all the other makers and the Silversmith Workshop that we talked about as well. So huge thanks, Lucy, for your time and sharing the energy and brilliant ambition and support and nourishment that and sharing all that with our listeners. Thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you so much for listening to our Des Talks podcast. Please do spread the word, share, subscribe and rate. We really want to reach as many people as possible, far and wide. This is the final podcast in our first series of conversations. We'll be back in September. Huge thanks again, and in particular thanks to Malin for the music and to Ryan Scott for recording and editing.